Wait, let me just.
Recording now. So. Yeah.
What happened?
Just quickly,
I just
Joe,
started the recording.
Are you going to share this recording after the session?
Yes, it's going to be recorded.
Yeah, we normally upload this
on YouTube.
Yeah, on YouTube.
Okay.
So yeah,
I'm
let me
having
just.
a lot of internet connections, so it will be nice to have recorded.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so let me just introduce myself. I'm Neil Buen. I'm the managing director of the MNL consultancy. I am a Salesforce MVP, and I'm the country lead of the Salesforce community in the Philippines. And I'm the co-leader of the Manila admin group. Yeah, I think Joey, take it away, and he will introduce Narender to you guys.
All right. Next slide. Yep. So by the way, just to introduce myself, I'm Joe Chan. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Cloud Jedi Solutions. So I've been working with the Salesforce ecosystem for the past 12 years now. And then currently I'm the community group leader for the Philippines along with Neil, and currently also rated the #1 developer in the App Exchange. So just to introduce our speaker, yes, slide. He's a Salesforce MVP, self-confessed Salesforce addict, electronics graduate turned Salesforce dev and admin. He's also a community speaker, lighting and analytics champion, a blogger in Force Panda, a 3-time trailhead ranger, a son, a brother, a friend, a helper, a cat owner, and an animal lover of pandas and wolves. So let us welcome Nads. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Narender Singh. Should I start by sharing my screen?
Sure. I'll stop.
Yeah, okay. I'm assuming I can share my screen. So let's start with that. Can you guys see my screen?
No.
It started. It's probably loaded. Yeah, there you go.
Awesome. All right, so hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. I really appreciate you taking out your time and joining us on this afternoon, evening, or morning, based on your time zones. All right, so what we are going to discuss about today is external services, and pretty much everything I know, I'll try to share and brief introduction with some details to some extent about external services. Why I really chose this topic is not just Salesforce, but everyone in the ecosystem in IT sector, everyone is moving towards low code solutions. If you talk about Google or if you talk about AWS, everything is trying to move towards low code solutions. And that's the same case with Salesforce. We are seeing a lot of development in flows. And this is something which is less talked about, but I think has a lot of potential and significance. And this feature is called external services, and we'll talk about it for what it really is. All right, so who am I? I am Narender Singh, as you already know. I'm working currently as a Salesforce developer in Germany for a platinum consulting partner. I'm also a Salesforce MVP. I'm also a part of Einstein Champions group. I'm a blogger at forcepanda.wordpress.com. These are my Twitter and LinkedIn handles. Feel free to reach out. I'll be more than happy to engage with you guys. All right. So what do I have in store for you guys today is, first we'll start with some basic introduction to integration and integrations and what are the pain points when it comes to implementation of integrations. And then we're gonna introduce external services, what it really is and how it works. And then towards the end of it, I'm gonna demo integration which takes between two Salesforce orgs. How it's going to work is we're gonna do this from start to finish. nothing built already. We are going to build it from scratch so that you guys can actually try it out on your own. So that's the idea. And towards the end of it, we can open the floor for Q&A if we have time. All right, so integrations. First of all, why do we need integrations? So the reason we need integrations is one platform cannot just fulfill everything. So as your business grows, you have to expand your business unit, and you have to if you are using Salesforce, then you have to integrate your Salesforce with different external applications. It could be a database, it could be let's say Einstein platform, it could be inventory, it could be a data warehouse, it can be a payment gateway, so a lot of stuff. So how are, at the moment, in the current scenario, how are we implementing these integrations? So we are writing a lot of Apex. So as you grow, as the business expands, as the org matures, what you end up doing is you write a lot of Apex, and then some more Apex, and then some more Apex. So and in the end, you end up maintaining a huge code base, which doesn't cost, which costs a lot. So let's dive into how a typical integration process looks. So first of all, the first and most foremost part of integrating with a secured API is handling the authentication. If it's if you are most of the APIs that you will be interacting with will be authenticated, and you will be secured, and you will need some kind of authentication to get the data and make the callouts. The second is you have to actually define the callouts depending upon what you are requesting, or you are either sending the data to the API or requesting it. And then once you are done with defining the callouts, you have to write some tests to actually make sure they are production ready, and also to verify that your callouts work. And then in the end, you have to maintain that code base in order to keep it working. So what this really leads to is we see a lot of time getting consumed in this process, because writing the code itself and then unit tests is a bit of tricky process, and it takes a lot of time. It surely is not an admin friendly process. If you show some code to the admin, I'm pretty sure if they do not know Apex at all, they will be pretty scared. And again, the last but not the least is costly maintenance. You have to spend a lot of bucks to actually just maintain this whole thing. You need a dev support, so it doesn't come cheap. So the question is, do we really have any options? I say I do, we do. And the option that we have is external services. And if you see in the bottom left corner, it says without writing any Apex. So this should really excite, especially the admins, probably not the developers, because they might be thinking, guy, dude, we have to write Apex if we are developers. But not really, because this is something, a different sort of coding, which both admins and developers can do, in my opinion, if you have some knowledge of integrations. So let's see how really external services handle all the pain points of this process. So beginning with handling authentication. So check. External services use name credentials. We will talk about it later, but it kind of handles the authentication process on its own. So you do not have to do any kind of special requirements. It doesn't need any code. Everything is checked. Next, writing test code. Not needed at all. We do not need to write code at all, because external services is a low code tool. We are not actually writing any code, so we do not need to cover it anyways. Defining callouts. So external services actually define these callouts in the backend for you, so you do not have to worry about that as well, based on the schema. And is it relatively quicker? For sure it is, because you end up saving a lot of time. You do not have to write code to authenticate. You do not have to write code to actually define the callouts, and again, no test code. So a lot quicker. And is it admin friendly? I'll ask this question towards the end of the session, and let's see how is the response. All right, so what is external services really? Simply put, external services is a feature within Salesforce that allows you to connect to an external endpoint using some declarative tools. So, but the question is it that simple? But yes, there is of course more to it. So how does it really works is if we start from the beginning, we see that external service provider has an API, REST API, and then some developer has to give you a Swagger schema, basically, which you as an admin will be consuming in external services. And then once you register an external service, that service can be later on used in a flow as Apex actions. You also need to define name credentials in order to register an external service, regardless of the API being secured or not. We have to define a name credential. So generally the process how we start is we get the schema, but in this case, we are going to try out something different. We're gonna build the schema. We are not going to rely on any developer. We as an admin, we are going to build the schema and we will see how it works. So basically from start to finish on our own as an admin. So just brief introduction to what a schema really is. So schema is basically a JSON formatted definition of a REST API. So basically it will contain all the endpoints definitions, all the responses, all the host, your URL, your parameters for the request, your body, and stuff like that. And basically at the moment, Salesforce supports Swagger Open API 2.0. It no longer supports inter-agent hyper schema using JSON after winter 21, I guess, or maybe summer 20. Not sure, but yeah, it's no longer going to be supported. And forward-looking statement, Salesforce is pushing towards also supporting Swagger Open API 3.0. If you don't know much about Swagger Open API, that's basically a tool which kind of allows you to generate a schema. It has some standard definitions which you have to follow in order to write the JSON schema in Swagger Open API 2.0 format. Going forward, let's take a look at the Swagger schema construction. So how we actually define a callout definition, if you can see on the left, it says endpoint. So endpoint is basically a URL which resides somewhere on the internet, and you make a call to it, and you define a method if you want to get some data from it, or if you want to post some data to that endpoint. And based on your request, you get a status and response. Your status, if your status is 200 or 201, if it's a post call, it basically tells you that the request was successful, and based on your request, you get some response. And on the right hand side, what you see is a Swagger schema definition. We are not going to discuss more in detail about this definition because we are going to create it in this session. But I'll keep this in the presentation so anyone who wants to look at this later can compare the stuff. And if we go to the next slide. Yes. And here basically I have kind of given a translation that how it really works. HTTPS basically translates to schemes. Your endpoint basically translates host and stuff like that. But as we are going to create it in this session, I'm not going to cover this part as well. I'll still keep it in the presentation for reference if somebody wants to look at it later. All right, so demo. Let's get started. I kind of rushed a bit with the intro so that we have enough time on the demo. So with that, I hate these pop-ups. Okay. So to start with, what we actually have to define, it says my screen sharing is paused, but can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Are you seeing
No,
my org?
We're looking at the PowerPoint slide.
demo.
Yeah,
Demo
demo.
slide.
Oh, still on demo slide?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe then I should start sharing again. Screen. You guys should be able to see my dev org now.
Yep.
Connected
App manager.
Yes, cool. Thanks. So I'll move this here. Can we move this? Yes. Okay. So to start with, basically, first we have to define, if you guys are not aware about authentication flow, how it really works is something, let's tackle it towards the end of the session. But basically how it really works is you have to define a connected app on the server, basically to where you are making a request. So I have two orgs with me, which is one is the blog org and the other one is the Berlin SF org. So we are going to make a request from the blog org to the Berlin SF org, and we are going to create an account basically to demo that we can actually use external services in order to establish connectivity between two Salesforce orgs without writing any code. So the first step in order to start with the authentication is that you have to create a connected app. So in the app name, just provide SF integration app, and then you can provide your email, contact number, not necessary. Then you can leave these fields blank. They are not important. What's really important is enabling Auth Flow. So callback URL at the moment we are going to just put a dummy URL because we will be getting this URL later. Once we set up the auth provider, I will explain what it is. So let's say example.com. This as well. And for the time being, we are not going to. OAuth scopes basically define the amount of access or the level of access you have in the connecting org. So this connected app basically will define how much access a user has when they try to connect with this org using this app. And once we have all that done, we can click on save, and that should be it. All right, so once you create a connected app, you will get some important information, which is consumer key and consumer secret. These are basically credentials which are used in order to successfully authenticate using OAuth 2.0 authentication flow. I'm not gonna discuss OAuth 2.0 in detail for now. We are going to restrict that part. So the next step would be to go back to your org from where you actually want to make the request, and there we have to define a name credential for it. So let's click on name credential. Berlin SF org auth. Name URL should be login.salesforce.com. No, I believe, but we can use this as login. Now, basically there are multiple ways. So depending upon what is the authentication structure looks like on the other Salesforce org, or basically the external application, if it could be a username password, it could be OAuth 2.0, it could be AWS, it could be JWT. So Salesforce follows OAuth 2.0 and also username password, but OAuth 2.0 is the generally accepted standards for authentication across web. So it's always recommended to use OAuth 2.0 whenever you can. Now, if you see, there is an authentication provider, and it is something you have to provide. You cannot escape it because it's required. So let's go to Auth Providers. If you go to your setup and do Auth, you will see this. Here, we are going to click on New and create a new Auth Provider. So what is an Auth Provider? Basically, Auth Provider is the entity which is providing the authentication. So in our case, it's Salesforce, because the external application that we are trying to connect is Salesforce. So we chose Salesforce, but we can also choose Apple, Facebook. And if uh, any of these do not actually, for example, let's say you have some external application which follows OAuth 2.0, but is not listed here. So you can use OpenID Connect for that. For example, Slack can be one of them. But in our case, it's Salesforce. The process is very much same, so it's not going to differ much. So let's give it a name, Auth Provider, Berlin, SF, or URL suffix can be same. Now, if you see here, you have to specify the consumer key and the consumer secret. So the Auth Provider basically goes back to this app in order to authenticate with this org. So here you copy the consumer key, copy it here, and then same for the consumer secret. All right. Salesforce already gives you the basically endpoint. These are the URLs which are used in the OAuth flow, which you as an admin probably don't need to know much about, but it's always good to have. Default scope is something you provide as a scope, probably not necessary at this moment, because we have already defined the scopes on the connected side, on the connected app. And that's pretty much the info that we need at the moment. So we can save this. We have now authentication provider, Berlin SF org. Now go back to the name credential and we specify Berlin SF org. And before we actually click on save, what we gotta do is, if you scroll down after creating an authentication provider, it will give you a callback URL. So basically this is the callback URL that you have to now specify if in the connected app, where we actually just added a dummy URL just to create the app, because it's a required field. But this is the actual URL, callback URL, which we will be using to authenticate between the platforms. So that is done. Now we can go back to the name credentials and check this. Let me make sure we are sending the, yes, okay. Yeah, so if you click on save, this should start a OAuth flow now. Miss match. Okay. Okay. We need to give it a bit of time, because as the message says, it can take 2 to 10 minutes in order to do the changes. So we will move on for now. And for example, we have the name credential set up. We will come back and authenticate it later. Now we have the name credential now in place. So we can now move forward and actually start creating the schema that we need in order to create the external service. So how do we really do it? It's simple, because thanks to Gaurav Seth, another MVP in our Salesforce community, I came to know about this inspector.swagger.io, which kind of allows you to build, which kind of allows you to do requests like Postman. If you already know about Postman, it's a very similar tool. But the advantage of using this tool is you can actually then from those requests, you can actually create the schema. And that's why you actually do not end up writing any code. So for example, if we want to authenticate with Salesforce, so we're gonna need token. So for token, we need the token. Okay. I'll switch back to the org where we want to make the request. So basically, in order to do the request successfully, we need a token. So that's what I'm doing. I have this code already, so I'm going to use it and get the token. And then we will use that token inside. This is not really the important part. This is something you have to do just to authenticate yourself, authenticate the requests. So we have the token, we have to provide it here. Now, how do we actually make the callouts, or how do we define the requests? So for every external application that you will integrate, they will probably have, most likely to have a well documented REST API document. So for example, Salesforce has its own REST API developer guide. So I just Googled Salesforce REST API, create record, since we want to create a record. If you click on it, it will take you to the documentation, which specifies how you have to create a record, what you need to do in order to create the record. So this is the URL that we actually have to use if we want to create an account. So let's copy this URL and paste it here. If you notice, this is a post method. So make sure you define it as post. And then you also have to define your org URL. So for that, we will pick this and replace the existing one. And now, as you see in the request, it says that you have to specify the body. So body is basically the JSON, which contains some parameters. So in this case, name and blah, blah, blah. So we are going to, let's say, give it a body so that we actually define a request. Name SF group. And let's hope that the request is successful. Okay, it is not.
The URL, the post URL, the HTTPS is doubled.
Okay, my bad. Thank you. That's the advantage of having a dev as a host. Okay, so I think that should work. Let's try sending it again. As you can see here, the status says 201. If it's post request, the status will always be 201 and not 200. That's the general web standards. So if you see in the request, in the response of the request, you get the ID, and that's what is specified here in the documentation as well. So now what's next? Basically what next is you have to first log in actually in order to create the schema. So I'll use my GitHub account. Once I have that, yes, okay, it's loading. So basically, if you check the time, we did it recently. So I'm gonna select this one, and I'm gonna say Open API Schema, OAS. That's what it stands for, 2.0, because 3.0 is not yet supported. And then what I'm gonna do is I'll click on Create API Definition. I just also want to point out that, let's say if you want to create, delete, and update some records, you can actually do multiple requests like this, and then select multiple and then click on add to collection and then create API definition. I haven't played around much with the collection part, but yes, this part at least I'm sure of, and it works. So let's go ahead and create the API definition. Once you click on it, it will take you to the Swagger Hub, basically where you manage all your APIs. So you have to give your API a name. So let's say SF REST API version 1.0 and public import the open API. Now, if you see here, this API definition, it's not JSON, it's a YAML format, which basically, so you have to basically export it as JSON resolved, because in Salesforce, in external services, it only supports JSON. So basically that's what we will do. Once we click on that, we will have the REST API to work for us, and we will then use that code. Yeah, so once we copy all of that, what we are going to do is we are going to editor.swagger.io. It's a nicer tool to edit the Swagger schema definition. This is the existing one. So I'm going to replace this with the new one. And now there are some extra things that we can remove from this part. For example, consumes and produces keys are not relevant, and they are removed from the definition when Salesforce external services register the schema. So we can remove that part. Security definitions are also not included. So let's remove that as well. Now, basically, if you look at here, you have to define few things. Yes, so first what we have to define is we have to define a host. So I'm assuming it's called a host. So host is nothing but the endpoint where you made the call out to. So let's copy that. That will be your host, and then you have to define schemes. I believe the name is schemes. We will verify it later. And then we have to define. So host, Swagger, info, these are all the things that come from the API documentation for writing Swagger schemas. It's listed on the website. So we will see how that looks. We can also remove this part because it's just an example. This part is also not needed because it's a security thing. Salesforce doesn't, external services do not really need it. All right, so we are pretty much done. Few things that we might encounter is, for example, if you see error property is of type array. So you have to define items for this. This is something you will have to explore a bit in order to really know how it really works. So I guess it's called type and then object. Yeah. So now if you compare this schema to the request, what you will see that the host, this part actually translates to the host here, and schemes are basically translated to HTTPS. You can also include HTTP, but HTTPS is now well-known standard and well-accepted standard across the web. So that's what is going to be used in here. And if you see in paths, basically whatever comes after the host is translated as path, and this is the URL where you are going to make the request. And the good part of this is that this the inspector when generates the schema, it actually defines the body for you, and you do not have to define the parameters in this case as it has already been done. So I'm gonna just quickly rename these model, this request body, and then I'm gonna rename this as well, response 201 for better naming convention. And that's pretty much it, guys. You have now a schema. So hopefully it's the right one, and let's check if it will work or not. So we go back to our org where we want to register the external schema, and let's go and give it a name, SF REST API. Let's select a name credential that we created, Berlin SF org auth, and I hope it works. Let's save it. It works. Okay, so that is how you can actually just create a schema and then create a definition and then register it in your external services. And yeah, that's pretty much it when you have to register the external services. Now, one thing that we missed earlier was we did not authenticate uh, our name credentials. So that's what we are going to do now. So let's hit save. This should initialize a auth process. So I'm going to select this. And if you see, it's asking you, all you have to do is select allow, and you have successfully authenticated with your external application, in this case, Salesforce. Note here that authentication status says authenticated as username, blah, 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 blah. And also it says that authentication provider did not provide a refresh token. For that, you only have to define a scope, which says refresh token. Probably we can talk about it later. So what's next? Basically, we are very much done with the setup of integration for registering the external service. All we now need to do is create a flow, which does all this thing. So maybe we can try with an existing one. Let's see. Let's start from scratch anyway. So since we are doing everything from scratch. So the first thing is, let's say we want to have a flow which takes an input and does the request on the Salesforce external Salesforce org and creates an account. Pretty simple. Let's keep it simple and neat. So I'm going to import a text field, name required, and get details screen, and that's pretty much about it. Now let's bring our action. One thing that we missed was operation ID. So if you say Berlin, if you see the name here is very, you cannot just understand the name. It's very difficult to actually figure out if you do not recall the name of the SF REST API, that is the name of your external service. So what we can actually do is go back to our external service definition and specify an attribute which gives the name to the action. So for example, every path has its own URL. So in the post definition, what we can specify is operation ID. This is basically the name of the method that will be generated by external services, which you can use in your flow. So let's say create account, comma, let's save it. If you see now, it had a name, it had a different name earlier. Now it shows create account. So it's easier to now identify and figure out which action you have to actually call. So that's the action name. We'll have to refresh this before we can actually, in order to use the new refreshed schema. So again, repetitive steps, detail, screen, text, space, okay. Then let's bring our action. Let's call create account. There are multiple. So this is the one that we have to use because the name of the external service, if you remember, was SF REST API. So this is our action that we have to use. Let's give it a label, create account. Now, if you see your body, this is basically the parameters definition, and this gets translated here. So in order to use this, what you have to actually do is you have to create a variable of Apex defined type. So, and how are these created is, I'll show just in a minute. REQ body. So if you guys can see external services underscore SF REST API underscore REQ body, it comes from here. So we defined that the body parameter, this is basically the name of the parameter, which is body, and the definition of that body is defined as schema, which then has a reference here, which basically has a name. So what happens behind the scenes when you register a schema is Salesforce automatically creates these Apex defined types, which you can use in your flow. So once you create this, let's say request body. That's pretty much it. And that's how you have defined your body, and you can use that variable in the body parameter of the request. But if you remember, we haven't really added the name to the request body. So that's what we are going to do next. Add name to request body. If you see, your defined variable shows up here, and if you see, this is all of this gets taken care of automatically by the platform for you. So now all you need to do is just specify the name input component here and click on done. And then you join all the pieces together. And at last, what we are going to do is simply display what was the output of the request. If you remember, in the inspector, we received here a response with the ID. That's what we should be seeing here as well. That's what we expect. So first, let's give it result screen. Let's call this one result. And if you now see in the actions, you see the output was created automatically by the action that you created. If you go here, you can see the 201, which you defined in the body of your Swagger schema. If you remember here, so this part is basically the definition of this part comes here. So it has basically fields or properties called ID, success, and errors. And basically this is what we will be using here. So this 201, and that's pretty much it. We can remove this. Yes. So let's connect that. Hopefully we are good on time. Let's save it. Let's call SES demo. Save. It takes a bit of time, which is strange for external services to, for example, whenever you have an external service referenced in a flow, the flow takes a bit of time to save, even if it's just one element. And the save time is quite significant. I guess external services team is looking into it, but I haven't heard from them on this topic any updates. So let's just wait. And hopefully it should work. Okay, so let's just debug this. I should rather open the developer console. Hopefully that will not be needed. So yes, it does take a bit of time to load. Now, basically, let's specify just before we actually go ahead and create one account. Let's see if there is any existing. If you remember, we created one account while creating the schema definition. So let's delete this, or maybe just create another one with different name. So let's say Joey and click next. Okay. We should have seen something on the screen, but we are not seeing anything on the screen, which is weird. So let me check the logs if everything actually went successful or not. Response 401. Okay, we are getting a 401. So let's authenticate again. Probably timed out, or maybe specify refresh token. Debugging external services can be a bit of pain, but if you know how to read debug logs, that's what I'm doing. I just went into my debug log and I checked that the response status was 401. 401 is basically unauthorized request. That's what it stands for. So that's what I did. I basically re-authenticated everything, and let's try it again. Hopefully it should work this time. Let's see. So run again. Let's say Joey. Not again. Okay. Demo gods are not happy today. So
That's okay.
yeah, so I'm gonna actually what I'm gonna do is I'll use an existing just to not spend too much time on debugging. I'm gonna use an existing name credentials, which should work. Okay, so basically, if you want to make any change to the external service, you have to actually remove all the references from the flow, and only then you can actually make changes to the external service. So I think I have already one, which is very similar to what I did. Slight differences, but should not be a problem. So hopefully that will work. I'm assuming we have name here as an input. Yes. Okay, so let's debug this. And maybe try a different name this time. Force Panda, please create an account. It worked. Yes. So if you see here in the response, we see that success equals true. We get the ID. And if we copy this ID and go back to our external org and check if this ID exists, we will see that it exists and there is an account getting created with the name Force Panda. So that's pretty much it for the whole demo. Apologies for the goof ups. Anyway, so I am going to switch back to my presentation.
Nads, I think we have one question on the chat.
Yeah, before that, can we just wrap up it with some considerations and limitations of this, and then we can take the questions?
Sure.
Okay, so with great power comes great responsibility, guys. So this is easy, but fairly complex at the same time. So considerations enable enhanced external services right away. This is something Salesforce introduced few releases back, which has a lot of power than the previous version of external services. So which basically which supports nested objects and stuff like that. So yeah, and quick note, it only external services only support REST APIs. Why? Because creating the schema of creating an open API schema can only be done for REST APIs. So that's why external services can only work with REST APIs. Unsupported schema formats, YAML format are not supported. OpenAPI 3.0 is not supported yet. Future statement, it might be very soon. A schema can have up to 100,000 characters. That's the present limit, but I believe there is a pilot coming up in winter 21, which supports 1 million characters. So that's a lot. You can actually register a whole full-fledged integration service using that. So that's great, but it's still in pilot, so you will need to get access to it. You can use all the methods get, patch, put, post, delete in the schema. That all of those are supported. Just a quick note, for example, external documentations, tags, and consumes and produces, as we saw in the external services, get ignored in the definition. So make sure to remove them uh, because it's probably going to count against the 100,000 character limits. Yeah. So with that, uh, some resources, if you want to go ahead, check out the Trailhead module and also the help article for the external services. It's pretty great. Do check out the considerations. It has a lot of considerations. So a lot of info there as well. And now, if you are interested in learning how to create the schema and by your own, and you want to go ahead in detail, go to swagger.io/docs/specifications/about. This will take you to the documentation which specify how you, what keywords and how you can use them in order to create an external. Then I have some posts on my own blog. So if you search for external services, you will find the related articles there as well. And with that, I would like to say thank you. Thank you again for joining us. It was a pleasure doing a talk with you guys. And let's open the floor for Q&A. So I'll stop sharing my screen and let's see if we have any questions.
Go ahead, Neil. Thank you, Nads.
Thank you, guys.
Neil?
Oh, yes. I think we have one question from you, Ray. In terms of deployment, will consumer key be the key in the production too? Or shall I create first the connected app in production and move it to lower environment?
Great question. I would always suggest create one in your production, a separate connected app in your production rather than just using this one in your sandbox, because if you can actually use the sandbox one, it should not make any difference. But the problem is if your sandbox is deleted or something like that happens, you will lose that and it will not work. So yes, I always recommend creating a connected app for your integrations in the production separately.
Another questions? I have, yeah, let's see. I have some though. So regarding this one, would you consider it as production ready? Meaning, would you really use this quite a lot for clients or companies already? I'm just not sure if it's that robust enough that you wouldn't encounter headaches later on, right? So
Yeah. Okay. So great question. It has some really tiny things that can be major adoption blockers from what I have seen. But I know there are some big enterprise companies which are already using external services for a lot of integrations. But I usually do not recommend this because if you notice that when I wanted to make a change in the external service definition, even just a name credential change, it stopped me from doing that. And basically I have to go to all of the flows where it is being referenced, remove the references, and then make the change to the external services, and then do the whole work again. This is too much work for an admin, but probably not for a developer who knows how to work with SFDX, CLI, but still. So that's a major adoption blocker in my opinion, because that's a lot of work if some change has to be made on the schema or name credentials, whatever.
yep, thank you for that. And then another one is, do we have to test the API first before we can generate the Swagger schema? I'm just not sure if we have any major APIs that already provides the Swagger
Yes,
schema that we can
I'll
easily
provide the link.
import.
Yes, there is, I think, API gurus.net, I believe that's the one, where you can actually find all the Swagger schemas for most of the APIs that are available around web. So that's one. Also, browseapis.com is another one where you can actually find these schemas for various REST APIs.
Okay, great. Since I'm
Yeah.
sure a lot of people are looking into this to hopefully not have to require a developer to build it, right? since most of the time we actually would need somebody technical in order to build integrations. So looking forward to the developments on this one then.
Yep.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yes, I do see one question in the chat. Is it possible that one user can authenticate against 2 or more connected apps? Yes, because it in the end just matters which connected app credentials you are using in your OAuth call. That's if, yeah, so yes, you can do that. Any more
Okay.
question, guys?
Any other questions? Last chance. That's it. People are shy.
Awesome.
Okay, so yes, now I have one question. So I just want to get a brief idea of how many people really found it easy to do. I know that Salesforce API is a bit, it's not that easy to begin with if you are new to integrations, but still, let's put it to vote. Maybe a yes or no in the chat, guys,
Or
please.
maybe a ranking of 1 to 10 if you want.
Yeah,
How easy or hard?
yeah,
10 is the
exactly.
hardest.
Yes.
But yeah, 1 to 10.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult do you find to integrate using external services? Yes, at the beginning, it can be a bit challenging, but once you get a hang of it, you will be pretty good once you get idea of how really integrations work.
10 being the hardest.
Yeah. Nice. We can actually take this to Salesforce and tell them, dude, make it easier for admins if you want to let admins integrate the system. So this is good feedback. Yeah, and do share about your feedback. We can use this feedback and I can forward this feedback to the respective product managers.
I'm sure they can easily build a toolkit or something like that that would help people easily remove the part of the schema that they don't actually need, right? So that's easy enough for them that they can integrate.
Yes. I would actually start recommending it if they fix this blocker.
Right.
Because trust me, this one is
I can imagine where somebody may be investing in that, building different flows, and then realizing that, hey, we cannot change this. We have to rebuild everything, right? I mean, you have to remove all of the different versions even, right? So you have to delete the old version before you can do that. So nobody wants to do that. So that can be the challenge. So.
Yeah. And I think although I cannot disclose the specifics, but Salesforce is currently developing an easier way to integrate to other systems. So yeah, I think it will be coming soon. Although we are not yet authorized to disclose it, but
yeah.
That's where they are.
Okay, so I see one question. I have seen others put a cert PEM as the part of OAuth enable. How can we generate that cert, please? Okay, so PEM is not yet supported in name credentials in Salesforce, at least from what I know. And for cert, you can actually create a JWT cert for JWT web OAuth flow, if I know correctly, if I remember correctly. So yes, I hope that answers your question. Cool. I see a feedback 5 from a person who has 0 coding background. This is so much easier to follow, faster to accomplish than writing Apex. Yes, for sure. Yes, but still you need to know a lot about integrations, because if you end up having an error, it might not be easy to debug this, because you do not get much info in the flow debug details, but you do get all the info in the debug logs. Good to know. Thanks. Anyone else?
Anybody else? Last chance. All right.
Cool.
I think that's it for now then. So really, thank you very much, Nads, for taking this time for us. And yeah, if ever you have a chance of visiting the Philippines, make sure to let us know, and we'll of course have you welcome you, right? So.
Yep. Sure, guys.
All right, else, go ahead and stop the recording now.